Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Have you ever been trespassed off property you legally own? An HOA president tried it with me. Clipboard, attitude, the whole thing. Then they started installing fencing like it was already theirs. I got the work order in my hands, and that's when I knew this was about to get ugly. The lot is only about half an acre, but it's got this absolutely gorgeous century-old oak tree right in the center. The previous owner had built a small shed underneath it back in the 1980s, and honestly, that shed was the main reason I bought the place. See, I'm into woodworking as a hobby, and I'd been renting workshop space across town for years. When I saw this property listing, it felt like fate. The asking price was ridiculously low because the lot is kind of an awkward shape, sort of like a slice of pie wedged between this fancy new development called the Estates and the county park. Most buyers probably looked at it and thought, what am I supposed to do with this? But for me, it was perfect. I had my own private workshop space, a beautiful old tree, and enough room to maybe start a small garden. The whole purchase process was straightforward. I paid cash, got a clean title, and started paying property taxes directly to the county. The lot isn't part of any HOA, which was actually a selling point for me. I've heard enough horror stories about those organizations to know I wanted nothing to do with one. For the first few months, everything was great. I'd drive over on weekends to work on various projects in the shed. I cleaned the place up, organized my tools, and even started planting some flowers around the base of the oak tree. The hydrangeas I put in really took off, and by early summer, the whole area looked pretty nice. That's when I started noticing the woman. She was probably in her 50s, always carrying a clipboard, always wearing this expression like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. I'd see her walking around the neighborhood during my weekend visits, occasionally stopping to take notes or photos of various properties. She never approached me directly, but I caught her staring at my lot more than once. The first real interaction happened on a Saturday morning in July. I'd arrived early to beat the heat and was watering my flowers when I heard voices coming from the direction of the estates. A small group of people was walking along the property line, and Clipboard Lady was leading them like some kind of tour guide. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard fragments about beautification projects and community standards. When they got close enough to my fence line, Clipboard Lady pointed directly at my shed and said something about it being an eyesore that needed addressing. That rubbed me the wrong way, but I didn't say anything. My property was clearly marked, and besides, what business was it of theirs what my shed looked like? It wasn't falling down or anything, just a basic wooden structure that had been there for decades. The real trouble started 3 weeks later. I'd been out of town for work the previous weekend, so I hadn't been to the property in about 10 days. When I pulled up that Saturday morning, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There was a sign I'd never seen before, right in the middle of my flower bed. It wasn't some handmade thing either. This was a professional-grade metal sign, the kind you see at construction sites or government buildings. Bold white letters on a dark blue background that read, "No trespassing, estates property," with smaller text underneath about prosecution and fines. The thing was mounted on a thick metal post that had been driven deep into the ground right through my prize hydrangeas. The flowers were completely crushed, and there was a ring of disturbed soil around the post where whoever installed it had tramped around. I stood there for a minute trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some mistake where a sign got placed a few feet over the property line. This thing was a good 20 yards inside my boundaries, positioned almost directly under the oak tree. That's when I heard Clipboard Lady's voice behind me. "Excuse me, you're going to need to move along. This is a restricted area." I turned around to see her standing about 10 feet away, flanked by two other people I didn't recognize. One was a guy in his 60s wearing khakis and a polo shirt. The other was a younger woman with a measuring tape in her hands. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, genuinely confused. Clipboard Lady barely looked up from whatever she was writing. "You're loitering in a restricted zone. This area is being prepared for beautification work, and unauthorized personnel aren't allowed." I felt my temper starting to rise, but I kept my voice level. "I think there's been a mistake. This is private property." That got her attention. She looked up with this expression that was half amusement, half annoyance, like I'd just told her the earth was flat. "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every word. "This has been community property for years. The original developer donated it to the association when the neighborhood was built." The guy in khakis nodded along like this was common knowledge. The whole area is designated as common space in our master plan. That old shed is actually a violation of our architectural guidelines and needs to come down. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Something about this whole situation felt very wrong, and I wanted to document whatever was about to happen. "Who exactly are you people?" I asked. Clipboard lady straightened up like I'd just asked her to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. "I'm the president of the Estates Homeowners Association. This is our Architectural Review Committee, and we're conducting a routine inspection of common areas. And who gave you permission to put up signs on this property?" She laughed, this high-pitched dismissive sound that made my teeth clench. "Permission? Honey, we don't need permission to maintain our own common areas. The association has full authority over all designated community spaces." The woman with the measuring tape was now walking around the shed, taking notes and occasionally snapping photos. She called out measurements to the man in khakis, who was writing everything down in a notebook. "That structure will definitely have to go," she announced. "It's not in compliance with any of our current guidelines, and it's affecting the sight lines from the main boulevard." I looked at Clipboard Lady, who was nodding in agreement. "We're planning to have it demolished by the end of the month. Along with that tree, unfortunately, the whole area needs to be cleared for the new pavilion project." That's when I lost it, just a little bit. "You want to cut down a 100-year-old oak tree?" "Well, it's quite overgrown," she said, like she was discussing a weed in her garden. "The landscaping committee has identified several more appropriate species that would better complement the neighborhood aesthetic." I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "I'm going to need to see some documentation about this supposed donation. Property records, deed transfers, something official." All three of them looked at me like I'd just asked to see their medical records. "Documentation?" Clipboard Lady repeated. "Young man, I've been president of this association for 8 years. I think I know what property belongs to the community and what doesn't." "Then you won't mind proving it." The temperature of the conversation dropped about 20 degrees. Polo shirt guy stepped forward with his chest puffed out. "Now look here, son. You're on private property, but it's not yours. If you don't move along voluntarily, we'll have no choice but to call the authorities." I held up my phone, making sure the camera was still recording. "Go ahead and call them. I'd love to have this conversation with a police officer present." That seemed to take some wind out of their sails. Clipboard Lady looked at her companions, then back at me. "I don't think that's necessary," she said finally. "But I am going to issue you a formal warning about trespassing on community property." She tore a sheet off her clipboard, and I kid you not, it was literally just a sticky note, and tried to hand it to me. When I didn't take it, she stuck it on the no trespassing sign. "This serves as official notice that you are not authorized to be in this area. Any further violations will result in more serious consequences." With that, the three of them walked back toward the main neighborhood, leaving me standing next to the sign in my destroyed flower bed. I spent the rest of that day taking photos and measurements. I documented the sign, the damaged plants, and the exact location of the post relative to my property markers. I also took pictures of my deed and the survey I'd received when I bought the place. That evening, I called the county recorder's office and asked about getting certified copies of all the documentation related to my property. The clerk I spoke to was very helpful and explained that I could come in Monday morning to request official records. I also did some research online about property law and HOA authority. What I learned was interesting. Homeowners associations have significant power over properties that are actually part of their jurisdiction, but they have exactly zero authority over properties that aren't. And according to my deed, my lot had never been part of any HOA. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the county courthouse. The records clerk helped me pull up the complete file for my property, including the original plat maps from when the area was first developed. It was fascinating reading. The estate subdivision had indeed been created from a larger parcel, but my lot had been specifically excluded from the development. The original owner had retained it as a separate property, and it had never been transferred to any homeowners association or designated as common area. Even better, I discovered that there was a recorded easement from the 1970s that actually established the HOA's true common area. a narrow strip of land about half a mile away that was supposed to be maintained as a drainage retention area. According to the aerial photos I pulled up online, that area looked like it had been completely neglected for years. I requested certified copies of all the relevant documents, including the plat maps, my deed, and the easement records. The clerk stamped everything with official seals and gave me a receipt showing the chain of title going back 50 years. Armed with this documentation, I went home and drafted a cease and desist letter. I'm not a lawyer, but I've watched enough legal dramas to know the basic format. I kept it simple and factual, identified myself as the legal owner of the property, pointed out that the HOA had installed unauthorized signage and damaged my landscaping, and demanded that they remove their materials and compensate me for the damage. But here's where I got a little creative. Instead of just sending the letter to the HOA's general address, I looked up the individual board members in the county property records. It's all public information, their names, home addresses, the works. I sent certified copies of my cease and desist letter to each of them personally, along with copies of all my property documentation. I also included an itemized bill for what I called unauthorized signage storage and display fees. $500 per day that their sign remained on my property dating back to when it was first installed. The response was immediate. Tuesday morning, I got a phone call from someone who identified himself as the HOA's property management company. The guy was clearly flustered and kept asking if we could work something out amicably without involving lawyers. I told him that was certainly possible as soon as the sign was removed and I received compensation for my damaged plants. He promised to look into it and get back to me. Wednesday morning, I drove by the property on my way to work. The sign was still there. Wednesday afternoon, I got another call, this time from Clipboard Lady herself. She was much less condescending than she'd been during our first meeting. "I understand there's been some confusion about the property boundaries," she began. "No confusion on my end," I replied. "I know exactly where my boundaries are." "Well, yes, but you have to understand our position. That lot has been... well, it's been treated as community space for so long that everyone just assumed." "Assumptions don't create legal authority." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What exactly do you want?" she asked finally. "I want your sign off my property. I want my flowers replaced. And I want a written acknowledgement that you have no claim to any part of my land. And the storage fees? Those keep accruing until the sign is gone." Another pause. "I'll need to discuss this with the board," she said. "You do that." Thursday morning, the sign was still there. But when I drove by that evening, I noticed something new. A truck from a local fencing company was parked near the property line, and there were metal posts and chain-link panels stacked on the grass. I pulled over and walked up to the work crew. The foreman showed me a work order that had been issued by the HOA for installation of security fencing around designated common area. That's when I realized this wasn't going away quietly. Friday morning, I called in sick and spent the day at the law library. I researched property law, trespass statutes, and HOA authority limits. What I found was very encouraging. Homeowners associations that exceed their legal authority can face significant liability, both civil and potentially criminal. I also researched the specific laws in our state about property damage and found that destroying landscaping can be prosecuted as vandalism. The penalties can include both fines and restitution for replacement costs. That afternoon, I drove back to the county courthouse and requested additional documentation. I wanted certified copies of all the HOA's filed documents, their articles of incorporation, their covenants, conditions, and restrictions, everything. What I found was very interesting. The HOA's original governing documents clearly defined their jurisdiction as the platted lots within the estate's subdivision. There was no mention of any external properties or common areas beyond what was specifically designated in the original development plan. Even better, their own filed documents included a map that showed the exact boundaries of their authority. My lot was clearly outside those boundaries. I now had everything I needed for a nuclear option. That weekend, I put together a comprehensive package of documentation. Property deeds, plat maps, survey records, photos of the damage, copies of the HOA's own governing documents, everything that proved beyond any doubt that they had no authority over my land. I also researched the individual board members and found some interesting information. Clipboard Lady, whose real name I finally learned from the public records, owned one of the largest houses in the development and had been involved in several other disputes with neighbors over the years. More importantly, I discovered that the HOA had been involved in a recent lawsuit with the city over maintenance of their actual common areas. Apparently, they'd been neglecting their responsibilities and the city had threatened to fine them for environmental violations. This gave me an idea for the perfect response. Monday morning, I called the HOA's management company and requested information about their next board meeting. They're required by state law to hold public meetings, and agendas have to be posted in advance. Sure enough, there was an emergency session scheduled for Wednesday evening to discuss property management issues. Perfect. Tuesday afternoon, I drove by my property and found that the fencing crew had made progress. They'd installed posts and were starting to string chain link around the perimeter of my lot. I took more photos and documented everything, then approached the work crew again. "Can I see that work order?" I asked the foreman. He handed it over, and I photographed every page. The order had been signed by Clipboard Lady and included detailed specifications for a complete enclosure with a locked gate. "Just so you know," I told him, "this is private property that doesn't belong to the HOA. You might want to contact your company's insurance carrier before you go any further." The foreman looked confused, but promised to check with his supervisor. Wednesday morning, the work had stopped. The posts were still there, but no additional fencing had been installed. That evening, I attended my first and only HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the community center, a fancy building near the entrance to the subdivision. About 30 residents were in attendance, plus the 5-person board of directors seated at a table up front. Clipboard Lady was presiding, and she looked distinctly uncomfortable when I walked in and took a seat in the back row. The meeting started with routine business: budget reports, maintenance updates, architectural review approvals. I sat quietly and waited for my moment. Finally, Clipboard Lady called for new business. "Before we begin," I said, standing up, "I think there's something the board needs to address." All heads turned toward me, and I could hear whispered conversations starting throughout the room. "I'm sorry," Clipboard Lady said, "but this is a members-only meeting. If you're not a resident of the estates, you'll need to leave." "You're absolutely right," I replied. "I'm not a member of this HOA, but since you're currently discussing my backyard, I figured I should probably join the conversation." I walked toward the front of the room, pulling out my folder of documents. "Also, your fence posts are currently killing my prize-winning hydrangeas. That's what's called a tort claim." The room went dead silent. "Now wait just a minute," Clipboard Lady began, but I held up my hand. "Actually, let's talk about boundaries for a minute." I approached the board table and spread out my certified plat map. "This is the official county survey map showing property lines in this area. Would you like to point out where your authority begins and ends?" One of the other board members, an elderly man in a cardigan, leaned forward to look at the map. His face went pale. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh no." Clipboard Lady grabbed the map and studied it intently. I could see the moment when reality hit her. Her face went from confident to confused to horrified in about 10 seconds. "This can't be right," she said. "It's certified by the county recorder's office, date stamped yesterday." I pulled out additional documents and laid them on the table. "Here's my deed showing clear title to the property. Here are the tax records showing that I pay property taxes directly to the county. And here's your own filed articles of incorporation, which clearly define the boundaries of your jurisdiction." The man in the cardigan was now frantically flipping through a stack of papers he'd pulled from a briefcase. "We need to call our lawyer," he whispered to Clipboard Lady. "Good idea," I said. "You might also want to call your insurance company. Property damage, trespassing, harassment. I'm sure they'll be very interested in this situation." The room was buzzing now, with residents turning to each other and demanding explanations. I heard someone near the front say, "How much did we pay for that fence?" Clipboard Lady was still staring at the documents, apparently unable to process what she was seeing. "But the developer told us," she began. "What developer told you what?" I asked. "Do you have any written documentation of this supposed gift of property? Any deed transfers? Any legal instrument that would give you authority over land outside your plat boundaries?" Silence. "Because what I have here," I continued, pulling out another document, "is the original subdivision approval from 1985. It specifically excludes my lot from the development and designates it as an independent parcel." The man in the cardigan had found what he was looking for in his paperwork. "Here," he said, pointing to a page, "right here it says our common area is supposed to be the retention basin on the south side." "You mean this retention basin?" I asked, pulling out an aerial photograph. The one that's been filled with construction debris and overgrown with weeds for the past 15 years? More murmurs from the audience. How much of the dues money have we spent on this fence project? Someone called out. Clipboard lady looked like she was about to cry. About $4,000 so far, the room erupted. $4,000 of our money for a fence around property we don't even own? How could you not verify ownership before starting construction? What else have you been spending money on without proper authorization? I let the chaos continue for a few minutes, then held up my hands for quiet. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You're going to remove your sign from my property immediately. You're going to remove all your fence posts and materials. You're going to pay for professional landscaping to replace the plants you destroyed. And you're going to pay for a proper survey to establish the exact boundaries so this never happens again. And if we refuse? Clipboard lady asked weakly. Then I'll file complaints with the county attorney for criminal trespassing and property damage. I'll sue the HOA for damages and legal fees, and I'll report your neglect of your actual common areas to the environmental authorities. The elderly board member was nodding vigorously. We have to settle this, he said. We can't afford a lawsuit right now, not with the drainage issues we're already facing. What drainage issues? Someone in the audience demanded. Things went downhill rapidly from there. It turned out that the HOA had been hiding several expensive problems from the residents, including environmental violations at their actual common area and a pending lawsuit from a contractor they'd stiffed on a previous project. The meeting devolved into a free-for-all, with residents demanding explanations and board members trying to deflect blame. I quietly gathered up my documents and slipped out the back. The next morning, I found a voicemail from someone identifying himself as the HOA's attorney. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss a mutually acceptable resolution. I called him back and explained my terms. Remove all unauthorized materials from my property, pay for professional restoration of my landscaping, pay for a proper boundary survey, and provide written acknowledgement that the HOA has no claim to any part of my land. He agreed to everything without argument. The cleanup started that afternoon. A crew arrived to remove the no trespassing sign and all the fence posts. They worked carefully to minimize additional damage to my property, but the area still looked like a construction zone when they finished. 2 days later, a landscaping crew arrived. Professional designers who completely replaced my flower bed with high-end plants and installed a small irrigation system. The work was beautiful, better than what I'd had before. The survey team came the following week. They established permanent boundary markers and provided me with an official plat that clearly defined my property lines. They also discovered that the HOA had encroached on my land in 2 other small areas over the years, which they noted in their report. But the best part came at the next HOA meeting, which I attended as a guest of one of the residents I'd met during the previous chaos. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well-compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with the nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year I would most likely be promoted to a regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me minimum wage for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on a Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply while noon was fast approaching, so I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her, and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they are not at work. She told me she got everything under control and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business, and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients, and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me, if I take over a task, it's not your task anymore. It's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client, and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it, and you don't call me or text me about it. Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she is paying me minimum wage for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client come in with an order. I accepted it. My boss was available to handle it. So I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client our boss was personally on it. The task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery, and everything at the office was handled. I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the carrier opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she had missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the client so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I had done was following her instructions. "Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to." She was fuming, but she knew I was correct and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my batter for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency, and I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. "But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information." I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally, but if she had used her brain like she is constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out. On every single page, bottom and top. Now that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few years ago. I was working as an activities assistant at a skilled nursing facility. We cater to the elderly, mentally or physically disabled. A lot of them are both, unfortunately. So my job is to engage with them, entertain them, lead activities. Mostly fun stuff like arts and crafts, bingo, things of that nature. I worked on Saturdays, and on those days we would play a game called horse races. Think Kentucky Derby. If you don't want to read the specifics of the game, skip the next paragraph or two. Basically, there are 4 horses and a long piece of wood or cardboard covered in green felt split into 4 with about 9 to 10 spaces for the horse to move. Like a board game. One side is labeled start, the other finish. The game basically consists of me using a deck of cards, picking which horse each player is and setting them in their place. Hearts, diamonds, clubs, or spades. Then I flip cards, and whichever suit it is, let's say it was a heart, the horse that is assigned to hearts moves forward. This continues until one reaches the finish line. Each resident chooses a horse that they think is going to win. If they are right, they get a piece of candy. Now let me start by saying I know this whole thing is a little silly, but they like it. And the free candy they receive if they win, and I try to entertain them by giving some sort of commentary. Like, well, Michael, fake name, doesn't want to race today. He's still behind the gate, or look at Tracy, fake name, pick up speed, she is really gunning for that win. So if they win, they get a piece of candy and it entertains them for about an hour. Most of the time it's a single Hershey Kiss that they win, but this one time I had these Russell Stover sugar-free chocolates, which let me tell are super expensive and run out quickly with this crowd. Also, let me say they don't have to win anything at all. They could be playing this game just for the fun of it. They're not entitled to win anything or for us to provide them anything for winning a game. So this particular Saturday, I had these Russell Stover chocolates and Hershey Kisses. Since the Russell Stover are so expensive, run out quickly, and a lot bigger than Hershey's, plus we play maybe 20 rounds or more each time we play, I made a rule. For every 3 Hershey's you get, you can exchange them for 1 Russell Stover sugar-free chocolate. So we are playing, and one of my regulars, let's call her Kate, fake name late 60s F, had hardly won. I think she had only won once at this time, but she is usually on the carefree side and likes the game, but a bit bossy at times. She tends to think that she can tell people what to do, and invite people I didn't mean the other residents most of the time, like, Carly, fake name, don't put that in your pocket, eat it now, it will melt. A lot of times does meaning well, but she also tramples on other people's feelings and doesn't acknowledge that maybe they want to do something else, and that is within their rights. And I do mean rights. There are a lot of laws when it comes to residents and nursing facilities, and a lot of them are under resident rights. But back to the story, I don't remember why she was trying to exchange some candies for one of her friends, one of the other residents, and she, Kate, had 1 Hershey's Kiss earlier in the day from a different game. This is important later. So I exchanged the 3 kisses for one of the bigger candies. Now the game ends, and she's only won twice. It is also important to note that she didn't have the previous candy that she won on her. And this lady isn't exactly known for her hygiene or the cleanness of her hands. My company actually had to make rules concerning this, but they weren't in place at this time. Kate loves Russell Stover candy, but even when she has the money to buy it herself, she doesn't QI roll. Anyway, my boss is one of those that is pretty relaxed about certain things. I'm more of the mind that while I can understand her point of view, it's the principle and about equality for all. So while my boss is of the mind, if they want another piece of candy, just give it to them. It's just candy, and it makes them happy. I am of the mind, I made this rule. It's not fair if I make an exception for you, but not for everyone else. As it is, I already give them a piece, even if they didn't win the whole entire time, and try to make it fair and fun for everyone. So Kate, being who she is, asks if she can exchange her candy for one of the Russell Stovers. I tell her that she only won twice. But she doesn't like that answer and begs repeatedly, saying please, and won't accept no as an answer and keeps trying to change my mind. Remember the friend that she exchanged the candy for earlier? Well, they give her their piece of candy and she thanks them, but continues to plead with me to exchange her pieces for another. In the back of my mind, I hear my boss and sigh because it is the end of the day, I am exhausted, and I really just want to leave. So I give in and say this is a one-time exception. She said that was fine and she understood, but it wasn't. She continued to do this at bingo and any other activity involving candy for a week, but only the ones that I led. So by the time Saturday rolled around again, I was over it. I only had like 3 of them left at this point. Like I said, the bag doesn't go very far and we run out of them quickly. And my boss didn't want to buy them anymore because of the cost, and it was cheaper to just buy a big bag of Hershey's Kisses because they last longer. I told her it wasn't fair to everyone else that she expected me to keep making an exception for her, even if they didn't want to exchange theirs for the Russell Stover. I told her I felt she was taking advantage of my kindness, and it was supposed to be a one-time exception, and she has asked several times now, putting me in a tough position, and I was going to have to be firm on my decision this time. I was sorry, but the answer is no. Again, she started whining and complaining and said that wasn't fair. I had to walk away before I said something I regretted or told her that if she really felt that way, she should buy her own bag of them and that from now on, we wouldn't have prizes with this game. One thing I didn't mention is quite a few times in the past, Kate would say that something happened to her candy or someone stole it. We take theft really seriously. It is actually considered misappropriation if an employee, like a CNA, moves a resident's cell phone while giving care and takes it from their hands without asking permission first or saying they are just going to move it to the side and will give it back when they are done administering care or doing what they need to do. And misappropriation can lead to being fired or other serious consequences. Even if it is just alleged, you can get suspended until it is investigated. So when Kate would say it was stolen, I was basically required to replace it or give her a new one. Even though technically it is in her possession, she is responsible for what happens to it. And she did this a few times that week also. I would have to go into her room and search for it to make sure she didn't misplace it, which turned out to be the case a few times. I also had to ask her if she was positive she hadn't eaten it. This lady is of sound mind and very smart, so there is not much of an issue of her forgetting where something is or having memory issues. Also worth noting is that Kate plays 8 bingo cards at a time and wins maybe 10 times over the 5 rounds we play. 5 rounds, 4 winners per round, so she is not suffering on the candy front. Yes, it is just candy, but she is taking from other people that like the candy also and don't have the money to buy it for themselves. She once asked for the whole bag, and there are only like 5 or 6 in each package. Like I said, expensive for not that many. This was around Easter a few years ago when I bought like 5 mini bags. She will also try to convince her friends to trade with her because she prefers one specific thing and doesn't consider that they may like it too. I know this was a little long, so thank you if you read this far. This was just one of the very many things I had to deal with when it came to residents and candy. Anyway, thank you for watching.